And I've been doing that for 30 years, and I've been traveling almost a week every month to these places. And from my knowledge, and frankly, great experience I have acquired over this long period, I have gradually become absolutely certain that in this modern world, the best prospect for lasting peace, increasing prosperity, and a civilized environment and life for us and our children and our children's children is as fully participating members in the European Union, its single market, and its single currency. Already, we're missing out as businessmen by not being in the single currency. Not only do we continue to have daily uncertainty as to the value of our sales because of the exchange rate fluctuations, and in all my business there's always been three imponderables. The first we all have, and that is to decide on the price. And the second we have is the freight. And freights go up and down. For example, if Russia suddenly buys a few million tons of grain from North America, freight rates rocket up, and so on. So we have to do that. But the worst one has always been not knowing what the exchange rate was going to be, so that you didn't know exactly what your sales were going to bring you in. And now that problem has gone from many of our competitors. They don't have it. And so we not only have that, but we have $3 billion a year in unnecessary transaction costs that have become a self-inflicted wound because we didn't go in. Added to this, the pound is very highly valued at the moment, and I hear all these economic arguments, but I always think that a lot of things can be done on the back of a fag packet. And the fact is that if you had some money to put to invest for a certain length of time, and there were two reasonable places to invest it, let us say building societies that were more or less equally sound, and one of them paid you double the interest of the other, I know which one you'd all put it in. And the pound is at the moment paying double the interest rates of the euro. And that, of course, means that we in manufacturing industry, and that's where I come from, are being very, very badly hit. And so you add the pound to all the others, and this leaves our competitors with the euro going down, laughing all the way to the bank. And if we were in there, we could be buying in from other euro countries on a fixed rate and selling outside the European Union now at a lower interest rates. We could be investing more. The Germans last quarter, their investment in plant and machinery went up by 4.1%. And in that time, their investment costs, of course, are half of ours because our interest rates are double theirs. Now, I hear all this about how terrible it is for their inflexible labor, and I am dealing with them all the time, very big companies, and I'm hearing how terrible it is, and I know from them, they know they've got to put a lot of this right. But I would just remind you that the standard of living in the original 6 countries of the European Union is higher than ours, that per capita income we become 11th out of all of them. More than half the cars on our roads are made on the continent. That more than half the lorries on UK roads are made in Sweden and Germany alone, and those are supposed to be the ones with very high social security costs. That the value of German exports is double ours. That Ford is moving more car production to the continent, and that BMW is saving Rover and not vice versa. Now, I just pass that on because I don't find when I go around how terrible it is for them all, and how they're all sitting there saying, good Lord, we've got to be like Britain. I mean, I don't find that. When I talk, I'm just talking to you about manufacturing industry, and Janet said that she didn't think that I was a bit out of date. Well, I don't think I am. For every job in manufacturing industry, there are 5 dependent jobs in the service industry. And the service industries, such as banks, insurance companies, the internet, supermarkets, are actually all people opening doors for each other. And the fact is that it's the manufacturing industry that creates the real wealth. And any economic power, anybody with any economic power, you will find it is based on a strong manufacturing base. And I think one of the basics of manufacturing industry, you will agree, is the steel industry. And I am told, and I'm sure it's quite right, that we are, some people say, the fourth biggest economy, and the others say that we're the fifth biggest economy. Well, I just want to show you how it looks to me, because I know the steel industry, that's what I do. And I think it's relevant that when you hear all that, that in the last year, 1998, these are recent figures, the European Union made 144 million tons of steel. China made 114. USA, 97.5. Japan, in deep recession, made 93.5 million. And in the UK, we made 17.75 million tons of steel. Now, it's important for our defence, it's important for our manufacturing industry base, but that's the reality of where we stand in the world of economic power. And I think we're better as part of 144 million tons, where we are a world leader, we are in there leading in the world, and I think that we have a stronger place in the world, and that we should do it properly and not lose more of our manufacturing base by staying out and losing out. I just don't believe there is any sense in trying to be an a la carte member of the European Union and not taking proper advantage of being part of the world's largest single market. And there is no future in free trade areas. They've never worked. And I can give you one example why they don't. If you're going to build a modern steel mill in this country now, you will add 50% to your capital costs in getting the proper emission controls, environmental controls. But if you are in another country that doesn't have that, you don't have that cost. So you can make steel considerably cheaper than somebody who does. So how can you have a single market without certain laws to make absolutely certain that you have a level playing field in which to work? And that's why free trade areas have never worked. And all the members of EFTA, which, remember, we set up to try and sabotage the EEC when it started and we didn't join, it failed, and they all joined the European Union because it will always fail. I could give you lots of examples like that. The sad fact, in my opinion, and this is just my opinion, is that my generation of the British lost our way. I grew up during the war, and I belong to that generation, and I think we lost our way. My great-grandfather, grandfather, and father, and the last two of whom I knew very well and were great friends of mine, all went out into the world in a truly positive way in the days of travel by steamboats, and they helped to establish or maintain parts of the empire. But now, very sadly, we've become a negative people. We have not created or even helped to create any moves to keep up with the vast changes in the world due to the communications revolution and increasing interdependence that comes with it. We've just poured scorn on those who have come up with positive projects, and we've prophesied their demise. Finally, we have realized that we needed to join, so we've come in late and paid a heavy price for having no input into the establishment of these positive moves. This has been the case with the coal and steel community, and then with the founding of the EEC, and then with going into the ERM at the wrong rate because we were late, and now with EMU. And so we've no one to blame, in my opinion, but ourselves if we don't like the common agricultural policy, or the common fisheries policy, or the rate we started at in the ERM, because we poured scorn on the whole thing from the very beginning. It said, well, without us it won't work anyway. And we're doing it again. And they're all self-inflicted wounds. And we now continue to limp along, still endlessly prophesying disaster, too frightened to join in fully, and yet too frightened to pull out altogether. And I have to say, I think the UK Independence Party has a point, that I don't think you could be half in and half out, and they have a point. But at least I think it would be a disaster. A once great nation, we're now reduced to a bunch of insular whinging Poms. Now, I have to say that I said to you at the beginning, that was my, whoever shouted "speak for yourself" is listening to somebody who's preaching the opposite. But anyway, I said that was my generation, and I don't believe it applies. I have children in their 20s and 30s, grown up now, working in serious jobs, and I don't believe on the whole they do think like that. I think they're out there. But I say to you, the euro is here to stay. When it started trading last January, businessmen and economists knew that the starting rate against the dollar was much too high. It has now come down to the great advantage of all those who had the vision, the courage, and made the sacrifices to join in the beginning. The pound, held high by high interest rates, continues to decimate our manufacturing base. I plead with you not to be shackled by history. Don't try to live in the past and ignore all the changes that are taking place around us. Don't talk of outdated concepts. Be positive and optimistic. Joining the EMU as soon as possible, in my opinion, will greatly improve the outlook for lasting peace and increasing prosperity, not just for us, for all the people of Britain and for all the future generations of this country.
Thank you, David, very much. Now then, believe it or not, ladies and gentlemen, this is now your chance to say something. Could I have a little illumination in the auditorium, please? Because all I can see at the moment is this very bright floor. That's right. Yes. Okay. Thank you. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. Yes, sir. You've been.
My name is Mark Glendenning. We all approach this issue from a different philosophical perspective, and I approach this issue as somebody who is a Liberal and a former member of the Liberal Party. But I come to very different conclusions from our first speaker who opposed the motion. It seems strange to me that somebody who claims to be a Liberal never addressed the democratic implications of this issue. Surely Liberals are about keeping power as decentralised as possible. If we go into the EMU, we will never be able to remove the officials who make the decisions that govern our lives economically from office. There will be no political accountability. Liberals in the 1980s were quite rightly critical of the Thatcher government for taking important powers away from local authorities and handing them over to Westminster. Why is the modern Liberal Democratic Party not critical about the idea of handing over huge tranches of power to an unaccountable, centralised political elite? Secondly, Liberals are internationalists. I'm not a New Englander. The reason I'm passionately opposed to EMU and the whole creation of a dangerously protectionist European Union is that I want to see Britain be a truly international, global society. The European Union is a highly out-of-date concept. It may have seemed modern to people whose political worldviews were shaped in the 1940s and 50s. It is not true today to say that the EU is the way of the future. Europe is a declining economic bloc. The World Bank estimates that within the next 25 years, Europe's share of world GDP will decline to about 10%. The really exciting economic action is happening outside of our continent, and if we as Europeans, not just as British people, want to stay in touch and connected to the global developing economy, then we have to have the policies that enable us to stay connected. Sufficiently liberal, flexible policies. The danger of the EU is that it will impose a corporatist, authoritarian, highly illiberal straitjacket upon our economy. The last point I'd like to make is that we were told by the first speaker opposing this motion that the French were in support currency. This is simply not true. The French political elite may have been, but the French people, like the German people, were never given the option to say whether they wanted to join the system in a referendum. And that is why very significant Eurosceptic political movement recorded an amazing result in France. There is growing opposition throughout of Europe. It's not just British people who want to live in democracy, it is all the peoples of Europe. It is the political elite in this country, like other European countries, which is driving the project. You must make a distinction between the peoples of Europe and the political elites of Europe.
Chairman, Desmond Harney, against the motion, the Oxfordshire branch of the European Movement. I speak, ladies and gentlemen, as something of a convert, as it were. I've had my sceptic phases, sometimes quite prolonged. My misgivings and my doubts, I sometimes still revert to them. But what made me come round to the pro-European position was I assessed both sides. And what I wanted to do was something positive. I wanted to construct. I didn't want to stand where we were and say we are different and therefore we will remain. This is where I take issue with Martin Holmes. He described, yes, the considerable difference, cultural, economic, and so on, between this country and many of the countries in Europe. I don't want to change everything here. I want to change both sides of the argument and create a new entity which we will call Europe, which takes many years, 10 years, 20 years, not a stroke of one bill. Yes, the thing for me that drives it all is a modern phenomenon, it's modern technology. It's modern transport, channel power, it's modern communications, computer, email, we're all being driven together. We cannot remain a small entity in all of this. And let me confess quite openly, yes, I do see it as a political project, and I do accept it as a political project, that we are trying to work together. It isn't just a common market. My last 2 points, very briefly, the pound. I do not think, and I'm very patriotic in this country. I have an OBE for one thing, and I still belong to the British Empire. But we should not see the pound as some totem, as some flagship of the Union Jack. The pound is a secondary currency. The pound is a third-rank currency.
It's the fourth largest.
The great asset this country has is the City of London. It is the only asset which is of global importance, rivals New York. Who owns the City of London? You'd be surprised, and I think Chris Huhne would agree with me, to know how much of the city, our famous city, is owned by the Germans, by the French, by the Americans. My own bank account used to work. So that is very important. The last thing I need to talk to you, I am patriotic. I do not want this country to be homogenized in Europe. I want the English to remain English, the Scots the Scots, the Welsh the Welsh, even the British, I don't think so it is.
Yes, they do, and I won.
But I believe we do it within the greater framework of Europe. And that is why I am against the motion.
I'm finding it very difficult to see anybody further than the parapet at the back there. There are some...
As a Canadian, could I make a suggestion?
as you're on your feet, sir, you have the floor.
Well, just a suggestion. I have a suggestion to solve the problem. I think the United Kingdom should join the North American Free Trade Area.
Thank you very much. Madam, would you like to speak? Thank you.
Yes, I would like to speak because I think with Mr. Hurford-Jones, I'm one of the region's eternal optimists, because I was a Labour Party candidate in the South East at this place 9. So I think so I'm very glad that we are World Bank and the International Monetary Fund. So I think you need to check your facts on that. And coming back to your point, the CAP is one of the worst things in the developing world. It undermines the markets of developing countries. Why is it so bad? I think it's because British people who could have made and possibly put into the debate about that were not there. I'd like to just spell a few other myths. The story about pensions is just wrong. There's a clause in the Oxford Treaty, Article number 103, which gives powers national governments to decide their policy on that. So I think that is just wrong. And likewise, on political union, I studied languages. I've lived in Germany for 5 years of my adult life. I've worked with the German Social Democrats. The Germans do not want federal Europe. They don't want a European superstate. Talk to a Bavarian, talk to somebody from Schleswig-Holstein. They are attached to their regional identities. They're in favour of national countries cooperating together at the European level at a level where it's appropriate, for example, on protecting the environment or, for example, coming down on exports, things like that. Cooperation at a level where it's positive and useful. And I think that the reason why the turnout was so low at the European elections was that politicians, the political classes like, have failed to go out and make the arguments, both positive and negative, for Europe. They've failed to make the arguments accessible to people, and that's why I hope that from now on, all political parties, including the Labour Party, I think we have a lot to learn, that we need to go out and actually engage in debate, and in a debate in the way that's being conducted this evening, in a civilised way, which allows all parties to be heard.
We'll attempt to maintain that civilisation, I hope, as I take just a few more from the floor. I think it's tremendous that we're getting so much reaction from the floor, and we'd like to try and pursue it. I can see you at the back now, so thank you very much. But this gentleman down here has been waving at me longer than you, so I will come to you. Thank you.
I'm a retired scientist. I'm not a politician. I get tired of politicians occasionally. But I am interested, very interested, and stimulated by the ideas of the new European group. And since I've heard Janet Bush speak, I'm even more in favour of them. I liked her non-emotional approach to this. I particularly liked her final point, that we should be going out to the fringes of Europe, where the ex-communist countries are. We should be pulling them in. Because if we leave these poor, underprivileged countries with racial prejudices, with tensions, to develop on our fringes, while we in the core concentrate on something like a single currency which is going to make us all prosperous, then I think we're going into a fool's future. I would like a Europe that is outward-looking. I would like a Britain and a British government that takes the lead in this expansion. I think is far more important than this talk about increased prosperity because of increased trade, because there are tariffs, and so on. These are all smaller issues with things that we have seen exemplified in Kosovo that I think we should all be very concerned with.
See 3 hands at the back. I'll take one of you, please, if you can. Thank you, sir. I hope we can hear you, please.
Well, my name is Mike Phillips. I was a candidate in the recent election for the UK Independence Party. I'd just like to ask the gentleman down there who declared he was a convert to Euro-Phillism or Philistinism, whatever you might call it. I too was a convert. I voted yes in the referendum in the 70s. I was young and easily deceived, and I believed the lies. I believed the lies that it was simply a commercial agreement, a trade agreement. There was no mention then of political union. I simply throw that in to balance the fact that one man has been a convert one way, and this is a man who's a convert the other way. And incidentally, I'm British, not English or Scottish. But I have a question. A question for a member of the panel.
I did say this was not a question session, sir. Okay. You're invited to speak from the floor.
I'll say it, and he didn't have.
Make your statement.
I simply point out that one of the panel proudly declared that he spent many weeks every month in Europe and around the world And whilst he was in Europe, he didn't find anyone there who was against it. They all thought it was a great thing. I was going to ask the question, but I won't. Did he speak to any one of the 18 million unemployed on that continent?
One final speaker from the back. Yes, sir.
Thank you. In the spirit of civility, I'd like to say how much I appreciated the contribution of our two pro-Euro speakers. I think it is very important that we can debate. But you'll forgive me if, as well as being a Eurosceptic, I'm also rather sceptical about people who are either A, a member of a political elite, or B, are businessmen. Because both of those people, I don't mean those two individual people, both those categories, if you like, have their own agenda. And both those categories have treated people with contempt over the years. It is contemptuous to say that the democratic issues don't matter. It is contemptuous when you receive literature through the post that says that you should vote for candidates because they like cats, Dusty Springfield and football. It is not merely a question of semantics to say that the EEC has turned into the EU. It is a very important difference. We were told by FP in 73 there were no political implications. Now he says, yes, of course there were. It's a straight lie, or disingenuous at least. And it is contemptuous to call us xenophobic. We're not xenophobic. We've already seen people this evening. No, I'm not talking about you two specifically. I'm talking about people on your side of the debate. It is contemptuous to call us xenophobic when what we want to avoid is an inward-looking Europe. And Europe and the EU are two very different things, of course. It's 15 countries in part of Europe. I don't want to be inward-looking. And I also don't want to be bullied. I don't want to be bullied into voting for the single currency because people tell me it's inevitable. Just as Marx was wrong in his historical determinism, so people who say that the euro is inevitable are wrong. Historical determinism has had its day, and as long as the British people do not assent to this, then it is by definition wrong because it has profound constitutional implications. We think that it's right to vote every 4 or 5 years to decide who governs us in Parliament in the United Kingdom. Equally then, it is right to decide if we should give up such vast tranches of our sovereignty and go into a single currency. So as long as the British people are against this, and it would appear to be very clear that on balance, that the vast majority are, then by definition the single currency is wrong, and I would urge you to vote in favour of this motion.
Ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for your participation. I'm going to move on now and invite our two teams here that have had a break from speaking and a chance to listen to you to make their summing up. Now, we've asked them to sum up for 3 to 4 minutes, and I would ask whichever one from each side is going to speak to try and stick within some reasonable time restraints there. And I didn't have a chance to brief my colleague here, but I think you're going to sum up for your side first. Okay?
Oh, okay.
Thank you. We didn't get a chance to talk before.
First of all, for the speaker who was concerned that the pro-Europeans might not be worried about democracy, I can assure him, first of all, that nobody ever joined the Liberal Democrats in this country in order to be part of a political elite, because we are consistently the most underrepresented relative to our voting share of any political party in this country. And if you want a career in politics, I would strongly recommend that you join the Labour Party or the Conservative Party, but I look forward to joining members of the UKIP in that famous fraternity of those of us who decide that we want to fight for things we believe in, despite the considerable problems of the political system being put in our way as minority parties. In the Liberal Democrats, we've actually always been in favour. We were the first party to advocate having a referendum on this issue, precisely because we think it is so crucial nationally that we have a very clear decision. We wanted a referendum, the other parties have come in to line in arguing that we should have that referendum, and it is precisely because of the betrayal myth that we now hear about the results of the 1975 referendum. The Treaty of Rome preamble says what it had always said. It always has a phrase in it which was about ever closer political union, ever closer union, and there was always within it qualified majority voting. In fact, for the gentleman who was talking about the difficulties of taking decisions in an international context, I agree. And one of the ways of taking more decisions in an international context is taking them by majorities so that the veto can't stop everything. Where you actually have vetoes being exercised, as Margaret Thatcher recognized when we introduced qualified majority voting for the Single European Act, allowing us to introduce the single market legislation, even Margaret Thatcher, that well-known Eurosceptic, recognized we needed qualified majority voting to get around the problem of everybody constantly exercising a veto and blocking dealing with issues and dealing with problems when they arise. So I think that's very crucial. The political side of it is very crucial. I'd like to deal with a couple of the points that came up from the floor about the economics. Let's nail on the head, absolutely and once and for all, the idea that monetary union, either this monetary union or any monetary union, requires tax harmonization. It does not. If you look, the tax, let me explain very simply. Tax harmonization in the European Union Treaty arises, the legal basis for it arises out of one thing only, and that is whether or not there is likely to be a distortion to trade. So the only legal basis for tax harmonization is on taxes like excise duties, like VAT, which could potentially be competed away because people decide to go to Calais to buy their booze and their tobacco, and then you see this extraordinary sight, if you stand on the quayside at Dover, of the Ford Transit vans coming back from Calais full of British beer and British tobacco because the excise duties are lower in France. The desire to have some minimum level of excise duties and minimum level of VAT is precisely to stop those sort of problems arising. There is not even a legal basis under the European Union treaties for tax harmonization referring to income tax or referring to social security. There is no question, there has never been a proposal, there is not going to be a proposal for tax harmonization. And on those indirect taxes, like excise duties and VAT, if the minima go up, then the country concerned can bring other taxes down. And what you see in the United States is you have some states, for example New York, which has a quite high income tax. You have other states like Arizona, which has no income tax. They're in monetary union with each other. You have some states like New York, which has a sales tax. You have some states like New Jersey right next to it, which does not have a sales tax. Tax harmonization is not necessary for monetary union, and let's knock that on the head. The tax harmonization issues that are coming up are issues about distortion to trade, the withdrawal and the withholding tax on interest income, for example, is again about distortion of capital movements from one member state to another, and I think we're kicking that into the long grass. There is a national veto on that. It's not going to happen.
Thank you.
Corporation tax, clearly the Germans want to see some harmonization on that because they're talking about countries competing to attract different businesses to invest in their country by offering tax concessions. So they want to see minimum for that. But I think we're a long way from that. The key thing is actually to fill in the loopholes, the exemptions that countries are giving, where a country is actually saying, well, we're going to give an enormous tax-free holiday to you, Ford Motor Company, if you come and invest in our country. If everybody involves in that, it's exactly the same as giving subsidies, and everybody will end up having no corporation tax revenue at all, and then income taxes really will go up. So let's be clear, where there's a distortion to trade, distortion to free movement of capital, savings, or foreign direct investment, then there is an argument under the treaties. But there is no question the overall tax burden, if you find you've got a minimum on one tax, you have more revenue to reduce other taxes. And you will find big differences in different countries, levels of taxation and levels of public spending as a result. Let me knock on the head this point about flexibility and wage flexibility, because I think there we've had a lot of misinformation. In the United States, the migration that happens in the United States is from cold northern states like Ohio to nice sunny southern states like Florida. It is not from states which happen to be in recession to states which happen to be booming. The key issue is wage flexibility, and we're assured, I believe correctly, and I think Janet made the good point, that in this country we've had labour market reforms, which I think were a good thing, dealing with excessive trade union power. We have a flexible labour market. Don't be afraid of going into monetary union, because the basis for that actually exists here already. I think this is an enormous opportunity for us. We can make real benefits by going into monetary union, and we ought to do so. Thank you.
Okay. Martin and Janet have indicated that they would both like to make a short statement.
I'm going to keep mine very short because I passed a note to the chairman saying let's skip these so that we can hear more from the audience, because I must say, running a group like mine, I spend much more time trying to find out what other people think than what I think myself. One point. In strictly legal terms, Chris is absolutely right. There is no strict legal basis for tax harmonisation. However, there is enormous political pressure from it. It is not just tax harmonisation. Germans have talked about wage harmonisation, which you can understand when you realise that their wage costs are 20 to 45% higher than other members of the EU. There is enormous political pressure. Now, I would say that Gordon Brown outside can use his veto, although he doesn't seem to want to. Inside, I think it would be far harder to stand up to that pressure. I just want to make one point. I think that the relationship between the UK and Europe, i.e. the EU, is not destined to be a very easy one over the years ahead, in or out actually. I hope that we will be out. A lot of people say to me, well, how can you be half pregnant? How can you be in the EU but outside Euroland? I don't think that the election results on Sunday are a victory for those who would say get out of Europe. I think it's extremely important for our shared future that we are inside Europe culturally, strategically. Enlargement is something that's a project that we can all do together, which is enormously important, as this gentleman at the front said. It's not going to be an easy relationship. We are very different in very many ways. We have a very different view of these things. But I do think outside the single currency, there's a hell of a lot to play for in Europe, and that's where Tony Blair really can show leadership.
Mr. Chairman, using up roughly equivalent amount of time that Chris took, added to the amount of time that Janet took, what I'd like to say are just a couple of points. Firstly,
Am I
in
allowed
response...
to heckle you, though, as one of your supporters heckled me and provide a response?
I mean, I was heckled by a gentleman down here earlier and I didn't complain about it, so I don't know why you were whinging, quite frankly.
I'm not. If that's the rule of the game, I'll heckle with the best of them. All right?
I didn't complain about it, you're complaining.
That's absolutely fine. Now we know the rules of the game. Go ahead, and every time you get something wrong, I'll point it out.
If you want to crucify my speech, you'll lose the sympathy of the audience, if that's what you want to do.
That's a good piece of advice.
There are 2 points I'd like to make. One in response to Chris's points. I've got a quotation here from Romano Prodi speaking at the European Parliament 13th of April this year. And this is what he said. The single market was the theme of the 80s, the single currency was the theme of the 90s. We must now face the difficult task of moving towards a single economy and a single political unity. After the EU's abandonment of monetary sovereignty with the launch of the single currency this year, the coordination of tax policies amongst member states is urgently needed. In the longer term, the EU must create true harmonisation of national economic systems. That torpedoes below the waterline all the arguments you've heard from Chris Huhne throughout this evening. The second point is that if we look at how the UK faced the question of European community entry, it may have been the case that in the run-up to 1973, our economy was converging with the European economies. But the truth is that since we joined, and particularly since 1979, our economy has diverged. We have a different model of political economy to the continental. Our political economy is essentially an Anglo-Saxon free market, free trading, deregulated model. The continental model may suit them, but it's completely different from our model, and it doesn't suit us. The future for the UK is the world. It's globalisation. Indeed, globalisation has made regional integration completely obsolete.
Regional integration belongs in the 1960s with That Was the Week That Was, the young David Frost, Harold Macmillan, Vassal and Kim Philby. It is an outdated idea. The future for this country lies in global trade, global investment. We've got to keep the pound, keep our flexibility. If we end up with the euro, we will be locked inside a backward-looking protectionist Europe of the kind that Chris Huhne has sought in vain to defend this evening. I urge you to keep the pound, support this motion.
Democracy, David has suggested on my left that he would like to briefly say something. David.
I can't ever go in for all that emotive nonsense, but the thing I can tell you is that we better stick with some facts. The extending of the European Union was brought up, and I think it was a very good point because it's something that everybody wants, and it's worth remembering that the reason all those countries want to join is that they see it as such a success. They wouldn't want to join if it was a failure. But for that scientist, gentlemen, for the scientist who made that point, I would say as a businessman, and that seems to be very sad for the chap up there, but unless we create the wealth to help those people, it's got to come from somewhere. And it's going to be easier to create it inside the European Union and the single currency than it is outside. That is my business opinion. And you need the wealth if you're going to help these people along. And somebody's got to create it. And the second thing is that on the models of the economy that we've just been hearing about, I think you'll find that in Germany, and the gentleman up there was correct in saying that they have far too high an unemployment rate at the moment, but they did not long ago take on board 16 million bankrupts. And I think perhaps a little foolishly, but with enormous heart, they agreed to them having parity for the Deutschmark. And the Deutschmark, I was in that country, and I actually did deal with that country before the wall came down in a perfectly proper way. And I know how destitute they were, and I could give you a lot of examples of people, but the West Germans took them on board, 16 million bankrupts. And I'm sure the lady who's lived there for some time would agree with me, and they're paying a special tax now to help them. And they're doing everything to get on. And so I don't think you should knock them for that. I really think that we should be proud to belong to Europe. It is the most civilized and environmentally advanced place in the whole world. And a lot of the environmental things that have gone on in this country have been led by Europe, not from here. And it has done us all a tremendous amount of good.
Like the common fisheries policy.
Well, the common fisheries policy, let me just tell you one thing about that, because I do know something about that, that there were 200 Spanish vessels in the Irish box fishing before they joined and had to come into that, and now they're not allowed more than 40, and they're absolutely furious. So don't talk about the common fisheries policy as if it was all bad, because the fact that we can't compete from Cornwall with 40 Spaniards coming up from Spain seems to me was because we haven't invested properly in our industry, which was the same with the steel industry when we joined back in 1972. So,
okay, thank you. Thank you.
I would like to say that I think it is in all our interests that we should join the euro as soon as possible.
Thank you very much. Okay. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, that's all the speeches that you're going to hear from the floor. And what I'd like to try and do now is to let everybody see the feelings of our audience. What I'd like to just do is to remind you of the motion that we set out to debate this evening. I hope you'll agree that we haven't diverged too far, but the motion that was before us is: this House believes the replacement of the pound sterling by the euro will lead to a worsening of the UK's economic well-being and a loss of control over our affairs. So what I'm going to ask you to do, I'm going to ask for several shows of hands. A couple of them are a little bit less clear, but let's make a start with a very simple show, please, for the motion. A show of hands for the motion, please. That this House believes that the replacement of the pound sterling by the euro will lead to a worsening of the UK's economic well-being and a loss of control over our affairs. Thank you. And a show of hands, please, against the motion. Okay, thank you. David, did you want to count that? Because it was, I think, for the motion, but it is fairly close just on a show of hands.
I think it was overwhelmingly for the motion.
Thank you. Thank you.
Overwhelmingly for the motion. I have to say, Chairman, I think it would have been better to have asked for a vote at the beginning of the meeting and one at the end to see whether anybody had actually changed their mind.
Well, that was,
it does seem to me that a lot of people here came with their minds made up, and I regret the fact that we didn't have an opportunity to vote first, and we could have then gauged whether people were actually changing their views.
Okay, ladies and gentlemen,
well, I think we did not make our minds up on Sunday. I think that the anti-Europeans are trying to stop the real debate, which will go on when we have a referendum, and we'll see what the result is then.
Thank you, ladies and gentlemen, thank you. It is a little difficult from here to see the back, and there was quite a concentration of hands against the motion at the top there, which I can't count. So, if we are all agreed on the stage here that the motion is carried, however, there were two further shows of hands that I was asked to take this evening, and I will attempt to do so. The first one is there anybody who feels that their opinions have changed as a result of tonight's debate? As a result of tonight's debate, is there anybody who feels that their opinion has changed either way?
On the motion, you mean? Their opinion on the motion?
Yes, that's right. Their opinion has changed on the motion before us. Okay, I have one hand there. And is anyone that was undecided before they came here this evening? And has now decided how they feel? Right,
one.
I have one.
One.
Thank you very much.
Two, Chairman.
Two, right. Two, thank you.
I see we have the floating voters of Witney here tonight.
Voters are a very rare commodity, I understand.
Especially for the Lib Dems.
Wait for the real vote. Just wait for the real vote. The name of the game on Sunday was trying to avoid a debate. It was trying to pretend it was about something that it wasn't.
Thank you very much. I have now to close this debate before I suspect it gets a little out of hand. It does at least show the level of interest that has been here this evening. I will just say that I hope you haven't actually noticed that this is the first time that I've been invited to chair a debate like this. My hands are a lot damper than normal, I can assure you. I also hope that you'll agree with me that we've been lucky to enjoy listening to some very eloquent speakers. And so it leaves me only now to thank them on your behalf, and also to thank you for your attendance and support this evening. It's a tremendous turnout. Thank you very much indeed. Coffee and tea, and I'm sure you will appreciate some liquid refreshment, is available upstairs, and hopefully you'll be able to speak to our speakers individually. Thank you very much, and good night.